My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/campaign to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Welcome to Mind Love, episode 272. Today's episode is all about the hidden motives that cause us to lie to ourselves and others.
So I should first address the elephant in the room question of why you should learn about the elephant in the room. It's about hidden motives that evolution has designed you not to notice. And we're telling you about them. So you might plausibly think, well, if evolution designed you not to notice these things, maybe you don't want to know. Maybe you're better off not knowing. And in fact, that's not a crazy story. One theory might be that you are a special person in terms of your role in society, being, say, a policymaker or a social scientist, and you need more to understand what's really going on. But another kind of reason might be that you're especially nerdy and socially unskilled, and when you just follow your intuitions, it doesn't work very well. And so consciously understanding these things may go better for you.
Turn up your frequency with Mind Love. Bite-sized brain hacks for seekers, dreamers, and doers. It's time to give your mind a little love with your host, Melissa Monti.
If this is your first time giving your mind a little love, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Mind love is a habit, and the more you give your mind that love and intention, the better you'll feel about yourself and your life. Plus, it's really a win-win because more subscribers means Mind Love attracts even more amazing guests to bring you their wisdom. So don't forget to subscribe. No one wants to be called a liar. But what if I told you that you, and all of us, lie to each other and ourselves all the time? Before you argue with me, but Melissa, I pride myself on my honesty. Well, that might be true, but here's the thing. It's not a conscious process. We've heard the expression, the elephant in the room, right? You know, that big thing that no one talks about? Well, the elephant in the brain is our own human selfishness. We're basically political animals and constant schemers that are just looking out for number one almost all the time without even knowing that we're doing it. But get this, we don't only constantly deceive others. In order to better deceive others, we also deceive ourselves. And that makes sense. We can lie with a clearer conscience if we don't admit to ourselves that we're lying. Maybe we put our heads in the sand while pushing our own agenda, or we refuse to look at the counter-argument at all, or we block out evidence that doesn't support our narrative. I have seen a lot of that in the last few years. But the crazy part is, our subconscious does most of the work for us. So we aren't consciously saying, nope, I'm forgetting that immediately. Or, I'll just make up an explanation for why that happened. We legitimately believe these lies that we tell ourselves. The more I meditate and learn to be the observer of my own thoughts and behaviors, the more I can actually see this happening in real time. We'll talk more in depth about this in the interview, but I see it happen in my life in arguments, especially when emotions are involved. I might bring up how I feel, and my husband responds with a logical explanation that should mitigate my concerns, but instead I think, well, there must be a reason I feel this way. And so point after point will just start to spill out, further defending my feelings, many of which I don't think I even thought of until that moment. Where did those ideas even come from? Well, they came from my own mind, because it refuses to see itself as illogical. And given that most of us aren't very good actors, or we don't think of ourselves as good liars, in order to fool others, we start by fooling ourselves. Or I should say, we have the decency to lie to ourselves first so that we don't have it on our conscience. So what are our real motives? Well, they're primal. We want what everyone wants. To be loved, to be respected, to have great sex with a partner who is physically and emotionally compatible with us, to have enough food to eat, and to live in a society that upholds our values and beliefs. And to get these things, we need to send out the right signals to others and be able to read the signals that they are sending to us. It's all about signaling and status. But if we're lying to ourselves, then why would we even want to learn this information? Aren't we just opening Pandora's box? Well, kind of. But here's a little secret. You automatically have an edge in the game if you know how the game works. So that's what we're talking about today. And our guest is Robin Hanson. He's an associate professor of economics and received his Ph.D. in social sciences. He's also the author of one of the top bestsellers in the last decade, The Elephant in the Brain: Hidden Motives in Everyday Life. So 3 key things we will learn are why it's hard for us to think clearly about our nature and the explanations for our behaviors, the 4 strands of research that all led to the same conclusion, that we are strangers to ourselves, and how to better read signals to understand other people's hidden motives. Before we go deep today, I want to give you a little gift, and I want to give it to you every single day. It's called the Morning Mind Love. I know how life can be. You're all fired up after an inspiring episode, and then a new day or a new challenge comes at you, and it's just hard to keep up that energy. Well, the Morning Mind Love is kind of like an oracle from your higher self to help you start each day with a positive focus. Plus, when you sign up, you get 2 free gifts, a 30-minute binaural meditation and 30 days of journaling prompts to help you remember who you truly are. And it's all completely free. So join over 9,000 people and go to mindlove.com to sign up, or text the word morning to 33777. And now let's welcome Robin Hanson to the show.
Very nice to meet you.
So what inspired your work? What was your first glimpse of the elephant in the brain?
I am an economist by profession. And during that time and before it, I've been thinking of many sort of big social science reforms. And I noticed initially that it seemed much easier to come up with big reform ideas in social science than it was in my previous fields of physics and computer science. And that really attracted me to social science because I wanted to make all these big changes. And what I didn't realize initially that I came to learn is the reason why there are so many big improvements possible in social science and not in other areas of physical science is that we don't actually we don't actually adopt them. They just sit there decade after decade as the promising things we could do if only we would choose to. That's puzzling to me. And learning to be a social scientist, I kept coming across these things that just didn't make sense. So for example, my first job after getting a PhD was a postdoc in health policy. So I spent 2 years diving into the details of health policy. And I did that with a theory background, having learned a lot of sort of general economic theory and having the usual sense of what general theorists think about health and medicine, and realizing that that sort of set of usual concepts and theories didn't help much to understanding what was actually going on. It was just weird and different. And over time, I've seen more and more things where we have this consensus on the high level theory that would make sense to apply to an area. And then you get into the details and the details are just really different. And you go, well, what's going on? Why are these things all so weird? And that gets worse and worse the more I know. And I was struggling to come to terms with why do we have these nice, simple, clean, elegant, understandable views about ourselves and the way the world is, views that correspond to what most people say about themselves if you ask them. And then you get into the details of the data and it's just really different stuff. And so this book is describing my attempt to come to terms with that, to make sense of stuff that didn't make sense. And the simplest account I can have to make sense that actually gives me some purchase is the idea that our general theory is fine, except it's just making the wrong assumptions about what the people's goals are, what their motives are, what they're trying to do with familiar things. We don't need some, new sense of the nature of rationality or the nature of society or things like that. All we need to do is just question what we had assumed about what things are for.
Well, the difficult part is that we don't usually even know our own motives. And it was really interesting for me to read your book because it filled in a bunch of gaps of something that I learned back in 2013. I randomly came across a YouTube video. I was staying at my boyfriend's house. He had a whole day of work, so I was just diving in online to anything I could find. And it was this video called Athene's Theory of Everything. And the whole concept was how often we make these decisions and we don't necessarily know why we do it. It's an irrational decision that our brain makes, but we can't accept that we're irrational, so we will come up with a bunch of reasons. And I haven't heard anyone talk about that until your book. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is what it's about. It's that we will sit there and not even know that we're lying to ourselves or we're deceiving ourselves. And so if that's the case, how do we come to terms with the motives of anything? Because none of us really knows.
Well, if we all didn't know and knew we didn't know, we could at least start in on the problem and be very conservative and cautious in making conclusions and slowly figure out a little bit more, perhaps still frustratingly not knowing very much. But the weird thing is that's not what we do. We act as if we know a lot and we're quite confident and that we all agree on these things. We're all quite confident. And then we go on for decades before we realize we're wrong, before we realize that, in fact, we know a lot less than we thought.
So it seems like the more means of science that emerge, the more things that we have, it seems like there's the more theories of everything. Like anyone who's been in the health field knows that there are 1 million different ways to potentially eat or work out or whatever. Everyone thinks the other one's wrong, and all of them seem really concrete. But what's cool about this research is that you talk about how there's actually 4 different strands of research that all lead to the same conclusion, that we're strangers to ourselves. Can you share a little bit about what those are?
Well, the strand where I came from initially was just the ordinary social science and the puzzles that ordinary social science presents. So, for example, the ways that medicine or school, et cetera, isn't what we expect. That's me being a social scientist. And then there are psychologists, of course, who study the human motivation and human feeling. And then they have come to the strong consensus that people are just often misled about their motives. That's just a standard point of view in psychology. It's old. So some psychologists reviewed or read our book and said, look, that your main conclusion is just well known. It's not new. Yes, of course. We all know that people are often wrong about their motives. So that's psychology. And then there's evolutionary psychology, which is more trying to have a larger theoretical framing of what reasons could we have? What would plausibly be the reasons that we would have for doing various things? What is the space of things that would make sense to be reasons?
So when we are looking at all of these things, we can go to apes, the way that apes interact, the way that we interact, brain studies, and it all kind of comes back to this idea that we hide our motives, and not just to other people. We hide our motives from ourselves. But what is the main reason for this? Like, I know that in itself is a motive, but like, what is our brain trying to accomplish for doing this?
So the structure of our book is that the first third roughly tries to explain why it might be plausible that you might have hidden motives, why that might be a thing that could make sense. And then the last 2/3 go over 10 different areas of life and try to convince you about the specific hidden motives in each of those areas. But the larger plausibility argument is the idea that your conscious mind, the thing I'm talking to right now that's listening, you think of yourself as the president or king of your mind, and you're not. You're the press secretary. You're not in charge of making these decisions. You're in charge of justifying them. You're in charge of talking to other people and explaining what you're doing and why so that they won't think badly of you. That's your job. So the press secretary isn't usually told the real reason for things. That gets in the way of their coming up with good explanations of things, and that's your job. You aren't supposed to know what's really going on. You're supposed to justify it. Now, you might think, why would there ever be motives I would be less than fully embracing, right? Why would I ever want to hide any motives? Why could there be any bad motives? What could that be exactly? And we say, well, compared to other primates, humans had norms. We used language and weapons to enforce, and that changed the nature of group interactions. We're humans. and allowed us to have much larger groups and more peaceful groups and more cooperative groups. And the key structure was a norm, that is a rule about who's supposed to do what or not do what. And the key thing is, if you see someone violating a rule, you're supposed to see something, say something, and talk to other people and form a consensus about what to do and then go implement it. That's a meta norm about norms. That is, you're not supposed to just let someone slide breaking a rule. You're supposed to do something. And so we're in this world of norms. And that means this, in fact, the most important world to us. There's this outside world of predators or food or weather or whatever. And we can mostly manage that. We have these large groups and they were pretty powerful and able and capable, and they could manage the outside world pretty well. But it's that inside world that was the biggest trouble. And the biggest risk in this inside world is you might be accused of violating norms. People would say you broke the rules. And because of that, you devoted a big chunk of your brain to constantly tracking everything you're doing and coming up with a good reason why that was the right thing to be doing and therefore it wasn't breaking the rules. So that's what you do all the time. Your mind is tracking constantly, making up a story. I was doing this because of that, and that's all perfectly reasonable. And because that's what you're doing all the time, trying to make sure you've got a good story about what you've been doing, that's why you don't necessarily know why you've been doing it, because some of the things you might be doing, in fact, would be violating norms. You are, in fact, violating norms a lot, and you're trying to hide it.
You know what's funny? We spend so much time feeding our minds, reading books, listening to podcasts, learning new things, but then we grab whatever's convenient to feed our bodies. And I get it. Life is busy, and sometimes a drive-through feels like the only option. But that's why I take Field of Greens. It's a greens powder made with whole organic fruits and vegetables. No extracts, no lab-made stuff, and just 1 scoop a day gives you simple, real nutrition. Field of Greens feeds your body with fruits and vegetables medically chosen to support your heart, vital organs, and immune system. And let me tell you something. Since I started taking it, I've noticed these little changes that show me how nutrient depleted I must have been before. Like the ridges in my nails, gone. My sleep, so much better. And my stomach just feels happy. You know that dreaded afternoon crash that has you reaching for more coffee or sugary snacks? Well, that's not happening for me anymore. When your body is actually nourished, it runs so much better. I've tried other greens powders before, but Field of Greens is genuinely different. The quality is next level and you can taste it. It's become my go-to, especially on those days when my eating isn't exactly Instagram worthy, because we all have those days, right? And here's the thing. They are so confident that you'll love it too, that they offer a 100% money-back guarantee. That's how much they believe in their product. So I got you 15% off your first order and free rush shipping. Visit fieldofgreens.com and use promo code MINDLOVE. That's promo code MINDLOVE at fieldofgreens.com. fieldofgreens.com.
You know what's interesting about mindfulness? It's not just about being present in the moment. It's about being thoughtful about the future. We meditate, we exercise, we work on ourselves, all to create a better tomorrow, right? But there's one piece of the future planning puzzle that nobody likes to talk about. I get it. Life insurance feels heavy. But here's the thing. Just like meditation is an act of self-care, getting life insurance is an act of family care. It's about making sure your love continues to support your family, even when you're not there to do it yourself. That's why I want to tell you about Select Quote. They're one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience helping over 2 million customers. Their licensed insurance agents work for you to tailor a life insurance policy for your individual needs in as little as 15 minutes. And here's what's cool. They actually reward you for taking care of yourself. If you're in good health, they work with carriers that could get you same-day coverage for up to $5 million. No medical exam required. And it's way more affordable than you might think. You could even get coverage for up to $1 million for as little as $20 per month. We just did this all recently after putting it off for years, and I can't tell you the peace of mind just from getting it done. So get the right life insurance for you for less at selectquote.com/mindlove. Go to selectquote.com/mindlove today to get started. That's selectquote.com/mindlove. I feel like this is why I've always been such an outlier. I am the norm pusher. I like to break those norms. I don't like when everyone's doing the same thing. That's my signal to be like, what is going on here? I have obviously been very controversial in the last couple of years of life. And so, but what is the purpose of doing this? Is it the competition within our own species? And does it have something to do with why our brains evolved so large?
So the main environment that mattered to our ancestors was each other. And this environment of each other is complicated. It's socially complicated. That is, larger groups might break into factions, and different factions might need to know who's in their faction, who's out. And for any one candidate, they might wonder how good would they be to have in our faction, or how loyal are they being? Are they betraying us, pretending to be part of the other group too? So sort of social reasoning is complicated because if we hear A talk to B about C, we have to know all of their relationships and all the different theories about who might have a reason to not be honest about any one of those things. So our social world is so complicated that that's, in fact, the plausible reason for our unusually large brains. The major reason for having such a large brain is to be able to manage the social complexity of those large groups. Now, you might have thought that that would be true if we just had complicated Machiavellian politics all the time, the sort chimpanzees do, right? They have alliances and they break up and they split and the different groups form and they're betraying each other and they're just doing all these complicated things. And that would just require huge brains. But we have these norms that keep the peace. So the more successful our norms at keeping the peace and making us cooperate, you might think the smaller the brains we would need. So from that point of view, it's a little bit of a puzzle. Why do we have the biggest brains of all if we're supposedly using all these norms to keep the peace? So an answer is that we are following these norms, but we're getting away with breaking them whenever we can. And it's even more complicated to pretend to follow the norms and follow them just enough so you don't get caught breaking them, but still breaking them when you can, and even coordinating with other people to break the norms without saying so. That's all really complicated.
This is a really disturbing example, but when I was a teenager, for some reason, I just didn't want to wash my hands after I went to the bathroom. I'm like, I didn't touch anything. I didn't pee on my hand. I don't understand why I have to do this. And so if I had happened to be in a public bathroom when somebody else was in a stall, I'd come out, I'd just turn the water on, and then I'd just turn the thing on. I do realize that's gross now, and now I wash my hands. Right. Maybe you'll never know because this is a public podcast and I could just be saying it. But it is true. Like, I could see how we just do these little things to show that we're a good citizen or a good human or we have hygiene, whatever it is that we're trying to convey.
It's not just, we don't follow the rules if we can get away with it. The meta rule that we're supposed to enforce the rules, we don't follow that one either. That is, we like to pretend we're enforcing the rules, but then we'll take pretty weak excuses in order to not enforce the rules. So a nice vivid example we use in the book is about drinking alcohol in public. So as you know, in many places, you're not allowed to just drink alcohol straight out of a bottle or can in public on the street. You can have a closed bottle that you're taking home. You could have an open can of soda, but not an open bottle of alcohol. So that's a rule, and the police are supposed to enforce that. But they're not really eager to enforce it. It doesn't feel to them like their noble grand duty to be enforcing such a little rule. They don't actually think it's that harmful for people to drink a bit in public if they're peaceful. But hey, that's a rule, and they're supposed to enforce it. So, a while back, someone came up with the clever strategy of putting a, say, bottle of alcohol in a brown paper bag and having the top of the bottle stick out of the top of the bag and drinking out of the bottle that way. Because, of course, you can't see what kind of a bottle it is in public. You can just see there's a bottle in a bag. Now, as a matter of fact, we all know that the only bottles anybody ever drinks out of in public, out of a bag, are alcohol. So it's not a really clever disguise. It's not like it's fooling anyone. If you see someone drinking out of a paper bag in a bottle in public, you can be pretty sure that's alcohol.
It's almost more obvious.
But nevertheless, yes, indeed. But the police have decided that this can be an excuse because they can't be sure what's in the bottle. And so they can let you pass. They can let it slide because they don't want to enforce the rule. And you've given them an excuse not to enforce the rule. So this is a kind of thing that happens a lot in our human world. So that is, one of the ways to break the rule is to hide it and not let anybody see you. But another way to break the rule is to break it and let other people see you who don't really want to enforce the rule. And then you just need to give them any little excuse to pretend they didn't see it. which they're often quite happy to take.
I'm just
So the other
thinking,
people in your bathroom when you were a kid, they may have noticed this, but they may have thought, well, did anybody see me noticing this? If they saw you, but nobody saw them seeing you, well, they could figure, I'll pretend I didn't see that and go on my way and not make a confrontation here.
yeah, I feel like I'm confident in my sneakiness, but doesn't everyone? So, well, one of the other things that we do besides, I don't know, adhere to these norms, enforce them, break them, like this push and pull of these just dumb society games, is that we signal. Tell us about what signaling is and how it plays out in real life.
So signaling is just another name for showing off or doing what you do with an eye to how it will appear, how it will look to other people. So whenever you adjust your behavior with an eye to the fact that people are looking at it and wanting to look good, then in essence, you're signaling. You're trying to look better by how you look. And, often there are characteristics of you that you're trying to make look better. So, for example, many of us would like to appear smart, and we're going to choose our words and actions in order to appear smart, over and above their functionality. And so one way we do that is just to have a bigger vocabulary than we really need. We use big words more than we really need to in order to show off how many words we know. But of course, we usually try not to be too obvious about that. We will use a big word that's somewhat appropriate to the circumstance and make it not so clear that we could have used a smaller word, just so that we can show, look, how many words I know. That's showing off how many words you know and trying to show off how many words you've learned. That's signaling. And so most anything you do with an eye to showing off, and if you think about it, for very long, you realize that most people, most of the time, are doing a lot of signaling. They're just adjusting their behavior to a great degree in order to look better to the people around them. Now, that's actually a norm violation, which is why we try to hide it. So an ancient violation of human norms is bragging. You're not supposed to brag. You can happen to reveal things that are impressive, but you shouldn't go out of your way to show things that are impressive because that's bragging. But as you notice, we do a lot of bragging, but we just do it with a little cover, with a little excuse. So I might eagerly tell you about the vacation I just had, not because I want to brag about the expensive, nice place I went to, just because I'm so excited and want to share it with you, my friend, my dear, dear friend, about all the fun I just had, right? So it gives me an excuse to brag if I have this other reason to give it. So a lot of the hidden motives we have are, in fact, bragging motives that we're trying to hide with something else.
That's why I love the time that we're living in now, because now it's like, oh yeah, celebrate your wins, share them. It's just like this awesome excuse to be able to brag and also say, this is about self-love and encouraging others rather than just highlighting why I'm awesome.
But we still have limits, right? We still approve of certain forms and not others. We certainly don't let people just go straight into full bragging mode.
True. So we have all these norms, and basically the people that are participating the most in society are collectively enforcing the norms. In what ways do we do that?
Well, so the usual norm is that we are supposed to see something and say something. So if you see someone breaking a rule, you're not supposed to just ignore it. You're supposed to point it out to other people and try to get people together to figure out what to do and then do it. But we have a wide range of norms, and some of them are pretty small and trivial. So for small norms, we often do something very small, like raise an eyebrow or give some slight disapproval, and we might think that's sufficient for a small violation. But if it continues or gets more blatant or stronger, then we're supposed to escalate. So in fact, we do a lot of such norm enforcement. I mean, that's a pretty common part of our interactions.
This is one of the reasons why I really dislike those stupid frames on Facebook where people are all of a sudden like, add this to your Facebook profile photo. And then it's like whatever the new thing they're pushing is. And so you've got a rainbow around it, or you've got your injection right there. You've got your like, I stand with this. And I'm just like, stop that. Stop that now.
Right. Well, I mean, one of the things that we'd like to show people around us is that we influence other people more than they influence us, because that's a sign of social status, dominance even. So one of the things that we're not very honest about is that we want to be seen as high status, and we want to take our rivals down a peg and make them seem lower. So a lot of our signaling is to show that we're better and other people are worse. So what you're just referring to looks like a resentment against somebody else taking the initiative and expecting you to go along, because then they get to act dominant and you have to act submissive. You went along with their initiative. You might rather you start the initiative and they go along with you, right? So, but of course, objecting would then show that you are aware of status and concerned about it, which is also a no-no, right? We're supposed to be pretending we don't care. So you can't directly object to their, status move there by which they, ask you to follow their dominance. You have to find some other reason to object to it.
Oh yeah, I have many.
Right. I mean,
And my rejecting their so-called dominance. That's the funny part about it, is we look at it as this way of being dominant, but isn't it quite the opposite if all we're doing is conforming to what everyone else is doing around us? Like, that's the opposite of dominance. Or is it that that's the dominant group?
Whoever started this trend, they're the dominant ones, and you're resenting going along, showing your submission, right? And so you don't want to be on the submissive end of this. You'd rather be on the dominant end where you started and they follow you.
True. So I just have to make my side the dominant one. So we enforce these social norms by, we'll kind of parade around our good deeds, whatever it is that we're doing. But we also enforce the social norms by interacting negatively with those people who don't go along with it. In what ways do we do that? But we also enforce the social norms by interacting negatively with those people who don't go along with it. In what ways do we do that?
Well, I mean, certainly in modern social media, people are accused of norm violations all the time, right? So people enjoy being indignant at someone else's violation of whatever norm they're invoking, and they are trying to shame and disapprove of people who are, supposedly violating a norm. And that's just very common today, much more really than it used to be when I was younger, in the sense that, used to be you might gossip about people behind their back and accuse people of things informally through gossip that they wouldn't directly hear. But now people more often directly accuse people in public of being bad people.
Yeah.
And they pile on too. People enjoy piling on to such things because they, get to feel pro-social by dumping on somebody.
And there's so many layers to it because, if you're just a person with a social media account, you might all of a sudden receive some comment on your feed. If you have a more public life, there'll be like a Medium article written about you, or like all of a sudden people are tweeting about you and you're like, I didn't even ask to participate in this conversation. You don't know my motives. I don't even know my motives.
But these pressures, I think, are getting stronger. We're on the upswing at the moment, and so we haven't peaked yet. So I think you have to expect more of this in the future.
So when you see these things coming out, because you have so much awareness of all of these kind of social pushes, the norms that are being created in real time, does it help you to just do you zoom out of that? Do you not kind of fall into the trap as easily because you are so aware? Or do you go with it because you know how society works?
So I should first address the elephant in the room question of why you should learn about the elephant in the room. That is, so our book, and so it's a book with a co-author, Kevin Simler, that I should credit here. It's about hidden motives that evolution has designed you not to notice. And we're telling you about them. So you might plausibly think, well, if evolution designed you not to notice these things, maybe you don't want to know. Maybe you're better off not knowing. And in fact, that's not a crazy story. So we have to come up with a reason why somebody should read our book to counter this theory that's a plausible theory that, in fact, you don't want to know. So One theory might be that you are a special person in terms of your role in society, being, say, a policymaker or a social scientist, and you need more to understand what's really going on. But another kind of reason might be that you're especially nerdy and socially unskilled. And when you just follow your intuitions, it doesn't work very well. And so consciously understanding these things may go better for you. So that's more my role. And I think someone like me who's just naturally socially unskilled has an advantage, at least in social science, of noticing things that other people don't notice because other people just smoothly glide along socially without even thinking about it. So if your mind is just telling you exactly what to do, lying to you about why you're doing it, but still telling you the right things to do so that you are effective in your social world, you won't necessarily notice that if you're in fact effective. Whereas if you are not very effective in your social world, you will stumble, put your foot in it, and notice problems. And then when you try to invoke your simple theories about the world, then you will more explicitly notice your theories aren't making sense of this. Your theories are at odds with the thing you're seeing right here. And so you will more notice holes in the theories that you need to work on explaining. So I might say, I wrote this book and co-wrote it with somebody else, but I am not by nature socially skilled. I do not glide through the social world just deftly doing the right thing at the right time in just the right way so that everybody loves me. I am awkward and do the wrong things often. But that's why I notice these things and was pushed to write the book. I noticed all these deviations between what we're doing and what we say we're doing because I stuck my foot in it. I just noticed conflicts, noticed ways in which my behavior and other people's behavior was just not consistent with the stories we were telling.
Yeah, I feel like I fall into that category, or maybe even a third one, where I've always noticed things. I remember being in middle school and in high school, kind of seeing people to conform to things. And I've always had that desire to resist. And maybe it's just my rebel streak, but it's caused me to have a little bit more of an awareness, because then I'll sit there and reflect, well, why is this happening? Blah, blah, blah. Didn't always know the answers. Maybe got some seeds here and there. But your book helps me to feel not crazy, because without it, then I'm just like, why is everyone else crazy? When really it's like, oh, we're all actually crazy. I just don't see my own crazy because of self-deception. And for some reason, I'm a little bit more aware of whatever's happening around me. So
most of the theories that we describe in our book are theories available to most people in terms of they often use them to explain other people who are rivals. If you are looking at other people out there for whom you're not looking to give them the benefit of the doubt, but more the opposite, you do tend to come up with theories that they're being driven by conformity or showing off or status concerns. These are things we often attribute to our rivals out there as explanations for their behavior. Then there's just one last move you need to make is to realize that you're a lot like them. Our book is a book that will tell you about yourself, but not by showing you how to look at yourself. We'll just show you the world out there of other people and try to say, look, on average, people do the following, and on average, that's best explained by these sort of motives. And then you can say, yeah, that's the world out there. I guess it's like that. And then we turn to you and say, and that's you too. You don't really have a good reason. Do you think you're different than all those other people? That's what you should do. Just assume you're like them. Don't look inside yourself. Don't ask, does this how it feels real to me from the inside? That when you look at that, that's not very reliable. That's misleading. From the inside is just these parts of you lying to you. Don't look at that. Look at other people and what they're doing. Make your best guess about how they work, and then realize you're probably pretty close to them.
What I'm hearing you say is everyone's crazy except for me. Just kidding. Let's get into the self-deception, though, because that part really does fascinate me. And yeah, I'll look at other people about it, but I do kind of want to see the ways that we deceive ourselves, because it's fascinating. And there's even science behind these counterfeit, or that have studied these counterfeit reasons. One of the studies that you brought up in your book that I found really fascinating was disability denial, and also like different split brain studies. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on there?
Well, one piece of evidence that we use to make it plausible that humans are often deceived is the set of experiments. These are from now the 1960s, so they're really quite old, but the project lead won a Nobel Prize eventually on the basis of this. But once upon a time, they had people who were mentally ill like we do today, but they got it into their head at the time that it might help to split their brain in half. Yeah, that is, your brain has two halves that have a relatively small connection between them, and they would just snip that connection. And they thought, let's see what that does to people. And it's not really that healthy a thing to do to people, and they don't do it much anymore. But that's what they were doing in the 60s. But they created these patients who really had two brains in their head because the two halves had been cut apart.
I'm so glad I wasn't in college in the 60s because I probably would have signed up for that study.
I think they did it to the mentally ill. I don't think they would just do it to a college student who signed up for it. But still, I mean, they might have decided you were mentally ill, so that would be a thing to worry about.
People have before. Just kidding.
But see, the idea is that one half of your brain is connected to one of your eyes and one of your ears and one of your arms and one of your legs, and the same for the other half of your brain. So now they could talk into one ear and therefore talk to one half of your brain, and they might say, stand up, to that half of your brain. And then that half of the brain would then use its arm and its leg to try to stand up. And then the other half of the brain will be pretty cooperative and go along and say, oh, we're trying to get up. I guess let's do that. and it would get up. And then you could ask the other half of the brain by talking to its ear, why did you get up? And of course, the answer is it doesn't know. All it knows is that the other half of the brain got up. Now, you'll talk to the half of the brain who controls the mouth, who would then speak back. And so then it would say out loud, but it won't say, I don't know. What it'll do is make up a reason. It'll say, I wanted to get a Coke, or some plausible explanation. So what that shows you is that your mind is just primed all the time to make up a reason if it doesn't know. Now, if it does know, maybe it'll say, but it's really just quite consistently going to make something up if it needs to. Your mind isn't very comfortable with the idea of saying, I don't know why I did things, even when it doesn't know. It just makes something up. So that's one concrete piece of evidence that if in fact you didn't know why you did things, you would still appear the way you do and pretend like you know. Now, that doesn't show that you're often wrong, but it makes it plausible that you might often be wrong.
I actually noticed this occurring in real time a couple of years ago when I'd get in arguments with my husband, because we'd get in these arguments and something would trigger me. And when you live with someone, when you're married, it's like all sorts of little things, and you don't even realize why you're snapping. It could be that they put the plate in the wrong spot again. There's such dumb reasons usually that we can't even grasp that's why we're upset. And so I would realize I'd be snapping with something, and the longer an argument would get about something, but why about this? And he'd defend his actions and I'd say this, I could keep coming up with stuff, and I would notice that I'm the thing I'm saying now was not even in my realm of awareness 20 minutes ago. And now it's the point that I'm sticking to, because in this argument, I realized that it was the strongest one. And this one's the one that's going to make my case. Right. And that was around the time, around the time when I had just in my mind that random YouTube video I thought about the theory of everything. And I'm I'm doing that thing that YouTube video told me, where I'm just making up reasons as to why I'm even upset. I'm actually upset because you can't put the bread in the right cabinet. That's the only reason, but there's no way I'm saying that. Now it's about everything else we've ever been through.
So it's really quite shocking in a certain sense. I mean, so if you think about people who, live in our ordinary world younger, and you think about what's the most radical thing I could learn about the world? The strangest thing, right? Maybe that there are ghosts or UFOs or real aliens or something like that, right? So people often go to extremes looking for what would be the most surprising, shocking thing I could learn about the world. And then, they're often drawn to these extreme theories, like there's a, world conspiracy of some sort to, do something to somebody. And most of those big, grand conspiracy theories, revolutionary conceptions, they don't pan out. The world is mostly pretty ordinary. But then you look inside yourself, which is where you least expect to see anything weird or strange or puzzling or or problematic. I mean, you are so close to yourself. You've seen yourself all your life. Why would yourself be at all strange? And then to come to realize that, in fact, you are really different than you thought you were. You aren't the creature you thought you were. You, in fact, have just been running on whole different sets of motives than you thought you had, doing whole different sets of things than you thought you were doing. And that's, pretty shocking to realize that even though all the things around you are pretty ordinary, you are alien. And then people around you are similarly alien. All of you are aliens. You're all just not what you thought you were.
We're all just in these meat suits, doing all these cues, these social norms, pushing each other to do stuff. We have no idea who we are, what we think, and why. But I'm wondering how these hidden motives appear in everyday life. What are some of the things that I found fascinating when I was going through your book was around body language. You say that we're actually blind to body language because it often betrays our ugly, selfish, and competitive motives. Can you talk about that more?
So we've been talking pretty abstractly so far, but I think most of our listeners won't be very convinced of my main claims only hearing abstract descriptors. The thing that will bring it home to them is to get to concrete, specific things they do and to see in those specific contexts that, in fact, they don't know what they're doing. So one of the first chapters in the book in talking about concrete things is body language. So, you realize that when people are talking to each other, like I'm talking to you, our focus mentally is usually on the words. And we're aware that the words have a cadence and maybe a tone and some emotional expression in the voice. And we're modestly aware of those things in the voice. And we're usually less and less aware that other parts of our body and environment are also communicating things to people. Our posture for walking, our pace that we're walking together, and things like who interrupts who talks how long. There's all these details that communicate a lot about what we mean. And we spend a lot of time in school on the words. Make sure people learn more words, and they give them an assignment about the words, and they have to spit back the words, and they have to write an essay in the words, and we change the essay in the words. And then when you're communicating in body language, you're never taught about any of that, right? You don't have school lessons about how to do the body language different in practice. It just as if it wasn't there, as if it didn't matter at all. But once you pay attention to the body language, you realize, well, it's often what we're doing most of our communicating with. Often the body language is saying most of what we're saying. And you might think, well, why aren't we aware of that? Well, so the main reason is that often what you're saying with body language is stuff you're not supposed to be saying. So, for example, we often flirt with body language, and when we're not supposed to be flirting, when we're not supposed to be on the market to be flirting. And we will deny we're flirting if accused or challenged, but yeah, we're flirting. And that's just a thing we do all the time through body language. And there's also this thing called status moves. So when two people are interacting in general, they are negotiating a relative status. And that status isn't equal. Somebody is higher status than the other person in the interaction. And they agree on this. They don't just fight over status. They tend to come to an agreement about what the relative status is in their discussion. And this will be revealed in terms of who looks directly at who looks away, who has an open posture, who has a closed posture, who interrupts more, who, takes the lead in topics, who sets the pace of the rhythm. There's a whole bunch of little clues like that. If you watch a video of people and you're looking for the clues, you can easily find them and see who's higher status and that they've negotiated and agreed on that. But if you take two pairs of people talking and you say, which of you is higher status, they'll usually deny, what are you talking about? We're not higher status here. We're just friends talking. But not only are there these status moves, actors need to learn them in order to seem realistic on stage. You have to be able to say, okay, you're the higher status person in this conversation. You need to act like it. You're the lower status person. You need to act like that. And then they need to know how to act that way so that they will act together as they should and realistic on the stage. But you might think, why don't we know about this? Why aren't we aware? Well, because it violates the norm that we are equal status. We're supposed to pretend like we're equal status, but we're not. We are, in fact, unequal status, and we're agreeing on those things. And so another case where we're unaware of something because what we're doing is violating norms.
It reminds me of one of the examples you gave about eye contact, where in places that are governed by dominance, eye contact is seen as aggressive. I believe that this is something that happens in China. I don't want to spread rumors, but, or maybe it's
Well, it happens in the US too.
Yeah. Well, where they like people aren't allowed to look into the eyes of people in charge or something like that. Maybe it was just a movie. I don't know. I'm spreading rumors on a podcast.
I mean, it's true in the United States and in the West as well, that when
Mm.
somebody is projecting dominance, you're not supposed to look directly at them because that will be seen as a challenge to their dominance.
Oh my God, I
And
did not
that's
know
true
that.
in our world as well.
I better not meet somebody in
Now,
charge.
but so the opposite is that when somebody's projecting prestige, you are allowed to look directly at them. So, like, there's this famous opera about, French Revolution and people struggling. And one of the songs there is "Look Down, Look Down." And it's exactly about how the prisoners in prison need to look down so as not to challenge the dominance of the prison guards. And it's just a common thing in our world. If you have an angry boss who's going on a tirade and throwing a tantrum, then that's when you don't look the boss in the eye. But if the boss is pretending to be prestigious and everybody loves him and how we're all one happy family here and giving the speech about that, well, you're perfectly okay looking him in the eye then because he's doing the prestige thing. And so it's about what mode they're in. And so we are often, I mean, you're probably sometimes in a dominance mood with, say, your dog or your child. And in those modes, they will understand your dominance move and they will typically submit if they don't want to fight. And you will accept their submission. And the whole looking at eye thing will happen there too.
You better not look me in the eye. Mama's angry. So another thing that I found really interesting is around laughter and how laughter is more of a social cue than it is an actual reaction to something. And one of the ways that you guys, or that this has been figured out, is that we'll laugh 30 times more in social settings. And then also the speaker laughs 50% more than the listener. What is happening there?
Well, it's especially noteworthy that most laughter isn't about anything like a joke. We just laugh without jokes. So play is a fundamental feature of a lot of kinds of animals. I just even read today that bees play. If you can believe it, you can give them little balls and they will play with the little balls.
Aww.
So animals play. And play is a mode where you're relatively safe and you're going to go through the motions of important sort of actions, but they won't have the important consequences they usually would. And so you can just sort of practice the sort of basic. So, little animals will do play chase and play fight. And when they're play chasing or fighting, when they finally catch each other, they won't actually hurt each other. Their claws will be withdrawn and they will play out the motions of chasing or fighting without actually doing so. And that's a way of practicing. And humans practice a lot, but we are very social. And so much of our practice is social. Much of what we're practicing in is social interactions, but we do a lot of practice. Now, for animals and humans, when you're playing and practicing, you need a way to know when you should stop playing because something got serious. So if, for example, you're play fighting and you accidentally bite your partner and it hurts and they squeal, well, then you need to suddenly stop playing and retract and back off and see if somebody's hurt and what to do. Or if you're playing and all of a sudden, say, a predator comes near to threatening, you need to stop playing and say, hey, it's serious. Now we need to run away. So animals and humans need to monitor whether they should keep playing because things are still safe and we're enjoying it, or whether it's time to stop playing because something serious happened. So for humans, laughter is a main signal that says we're still playing. It's okay. And that's the kind of signal you need to give when there's a doubt. Are we still playing or is someone hurt? So for humans, if we're all feeling very safe, it's not funny. We're not laughing. And if somebody gets hurt, it's not funny or it's serious. But if somebody looks like they might have gotten hurt, then they laugh to say, I'm not hurt. We're still playing. And so we humans often play fight, play insult, play all sorts of things for practice, but then somebody might look like they got hurt. So, for example, much stand-up comedy often involves insulting people, pointing out people's foibles and embarrassing things. And that's funny because it looks kind of like somebody might be getting hurt. And we're all laughing to say, yeah, but we're not hurt. This is okay. You can keep going. Because that's what's enjoyable, to go up to the edge of somebody being hurt and still nobody's hurt. We're showing that we're sort of managing the maximal ability to test the edge and the boundaries of what might hurt somebody, but not actually hurt anybody. But of course, now sometimes when we're play fighting, somebody does get hurt and then they pretend they're not hurt and they laugh, a somewhat forced laugh, which then we have to wonder, is it a real laugh or is it a forced laugh? Because that's important distinction. So, humans are often making these subtle distinctions, whether a laugh is legitimate and genuine or forced, because people who are actually feeling threatened and actually feeling unsafe will sometimes pretend to be safe and then do a fake laugh.
I'm actually thinking of my son. He's 19 months old, and months ago he fell, and I was just like, "Are you okay?" And he learned how to say, "I'm okay." And now it's funny. This happened 4 times yesterday. He's running, he falls, and he'll start to cry, sort of. It's like the half fake cry that toddlers do. He's like, "I'm okay,
Right.
I'm okay." And he just starts saying, "I'm okay" on his own because he doesn't want to stop playing. But he can't help his instinct of the laugh or the cry that has no tears. And I'm just like, "Are you sure? Do you want a hug? Do you want to hug
He's
it
not
out?"
realizing these messages are supposed to be separated. He's sort of combining messages that usually be separated into the same thing. And he's going to learn later that you pick a story. You're hurt and you want sympathy, or you're okay and people just leave you alone. You pick one of those two. If you mix them up, people will be confused.
Yeah. See, maybe he doesn't know what he wants. He's kind of like me. He wants both. I don't know. Well, another thing I wanted to touch on is around conversation, because one of the things you brought up is that people that talk or they share information, and one of the sort of social things is that if you're a reliable source of new information, you're likely to make a good teammate. So people will share things. I've also heard, though, around listening, when people really feel heard, where's that balance of, are people going to like you more if you talk more, or are people going to like you more if you listen more?
Well, clearly, on average, people are trying to talk. So we certainly see more conflicts where 2 people are trying to talk at the same time than conflicts where 2 people are trying to stay silent at the same time and they're trying to push the other person to talk, right? That doesn't happen as often. So clearly people are on the margin trying to talk as opposed to trying to listen. So that's a clue. Now, that's actually a bit at odds with the simplest theory most people will give you about why they're talking. If you ask people, why are you talking? What's the point? The best pro-social explanation they can come up with is sharing of information. We all know things that other people don't know. I'll tell you some things I know. You tell me some things you know. We'll both be better off for it. Isn't that nice? And that would be a plausible thing to be doing. But if that's what you were doing, that's more like trading. And you'd be giving up the information as part of your compensation or to get other people to tell you things. So in that scenario, you would be reluctant to talk and eager to listen if it was about sharing the information. And you might even keep track of how much information you've given and how much they've given. You might say, look, I've told you 3 useful things lately. You haven't told me anything. It's your turn. Let's go. And we might then talk about the most important things to us because, well, what's the point of sharing valuable information if it's not valuable? And the striking thing is that we are not talking about our most important things. We're not keeping track of who said how many things. And we're more eager to talk than listen. So this simple theory of sharing information just doesn't work very well. Well, you might say, well, what other theory is there? Well, there's showing off. What are you showing off, though? You might think you could show off having the most valuable information, but that's not what you're doing. You're not talking about the most important stuff. A lot of small talk is that small. It's about unimportant things. So our story is that we're playing a game where the rule is you don't control where the conversation goes, and it will just go to random places. But wherever it goes, it's your job to find something relevant to say about it. And if you're the sort of person who, wherever the conversation goes, can find something interesting and relevant to say, that will prove that you just have a nice, big, juicy backpack of tools and resources that will be valuable whenever we actually want to talk about something that matters. You'll also have things to say about that, and that will be handy. And that's what we're showing off. And then, of course, you might say, well, then why don't we admit that's what we're doing? And again, you're not supposed to be showing off.
I don't know if I feel really seen right now or really attacked right now. I can definitely find something to say about anything that comes up. Wasn't aware that was my motive, but now that you say it,
Right.
it's
And you
sitting
might
pretty
wonder
well.
why tolerate all the small talk? Why not go whenever you could to the most important topics and talk about those? Because people do have an aversion to that. They do get uncomfortable if you talk about important topics. They'd rather do small talk.
Again, feel seen. I'm the person who keeps trying to make it deeper. And yes, people are usually uncomfortable and then they do the, oh, cool, look over there. And then they walk away. And I'm
Right.
like, this is why I have a podcast, because I can bring people on and make them talk deep with me. But I'm curious. So we've learned a lot about basically how society works, how we deceive ourselves, how we're basically playing this whole social game. But you pose a question in your book where you say, like, well, why do we continue working so hard? And the answer is that we're basically stuck in this rat race, locked in a game of competitive signaling. And so what is there to gain now? Like before it was survival. Are we just surviving in a different way because we're seeking prestige, or why do we continue working so hard?
Well, so first of all, you could ask what would be the most effective strategy in the modern world for an evolved creature who is trying to reproduce and have many descendants. And then you could ask, what's the strategy we're executing? And maybe that's different, and why? So it could be that the strategies we're executing are evolution's habit for us. When looking at this world, we're somehow mapping it onto an analogous ancient world. And this would have been the reasonable thing to do in that analogous ancient world. But our evolution just hasn't quite figured out that this world we're in at the moment is just unprecedented and needs a new rule book. But the first thing might be to just pause and ask, well, what would make sense in this sort of situation? So one basic, feature of human behavior was that we mostly had good times with rare bad times in between. And it was really important to prepare for the bad times. But most of the things we can invest in wouldn't last very long. So if you collect a pile of food, it won't last very long. It'll get rotten or get stolen. And you could build a fence and it'll fall apart. What can you invest in that will actually be valuable in the coming bad times? Well, plausibly, that was your relations with other people. You can invest in allies. You can invest in connections. You can invest in other people's respect for you. In the good times, those were valuable things to invest in, ready for the coming bad times. And so one simple story might be, well, we've had good times for a while, but our evolved instincts expect bad times are just around the corner. And we're still collecting and preparing for them. We're still collecting a lot of social respect and connections and status so that when the bad times come, we'll be ready for it. That makes some sense. The thing that I think makes less sense is the low fertility we have today. For most animals, when times are good, that's when they go wild having lots of kids. And when times are bad, that's when they cut back on having kids and only have the ones they thought maybe they could make last through the bad times into the good ones. But here we are in an unprecedentedly good times that has gone on for an unprecedented duration, and we're having the fewest kids we've ever had. Something's just way off on that on sort of pure evolutionary logic. And so we have to come up with a story there. That'll have to be a story of some sort of mistake, a way evolution is just misreading our current context as like some past context and having us do what would have made sense in that past context. But in this one, it's just wrong. Now, I have a story like that, but it's not from our book, The Elephant in the Brain. It's sort of an added story. But that's the kind of thing you need to do to make sense of that sort of puzzle. So mostly Elephant in the Brain is about just how our habits are not what we think we're doing, but they're motives that make sense and that they evolved as motives, and that we are executing strategies that made a lot of sense for our ancestors and still a fair bit of sense for us today, but that we're not even aware of what those things are.
Yeah, I also have been reading just about how our fertility is lower than it's ever been. Testosterone is lower than it's ever been. And there's quite the collective push of discouraging
Denial.
babies these days.
Right. Right. I think people said, it's related to sort of environmental impulses too, but basically like the fundamental environmental impulses to say we should just be having less impact on nature. And then people think, oh, fewer kids, that'll be less impact on nature. We are on a trajectory, I think, to starting to have population decline and perhaps severe population decline over a longer scale. And That's not only disturbing, it's also just puzzling, right? The fundamental thing is evolution should have been all over this, right? Using an unprecedented wealth and prosperity to have lots of kids. So something is just going way, way wrong. But I think I have a rough idea what it is.
What is it?
I think we're all trying to be king or queen, or having our kids be king or queen. So in the last 10,000 years, we lived in these larger social groups than our ancestors did before. Instead of a group of maybe 30, we're more in a group of 1,000 or something. And so in a group of 1,000, there's usually some person or couple at the top, and they have unusual reproductive success. The king or queen do pretty well. And so it made sense to start to think about, do I have a shot at being king or queen? And that if I do have a shot at being king or queen, I should start to invest in the sort of social resources that would make me a good candidate for king or queen. So in almost all society, there's some elite ranking, and there's some set of cultural styles and resources that you need to have to be considered a candidate for the top position. It might be poetry or dressmaking or flute playing or, who knows what. But in most societies, there's been some elite arts or habits or things that the elite people are supposed to learn how to do well in order to be considered a candidate for the top positions. And so if you think you have a shot at being the top position, it makes sense then to distract yourself from other things and collect those elite capabilities. And that will come at the cost of other things and fertility. That is, if you have children, you're trying to make them king or queen, you'll have to have fewer of them and sort of devote more time teaching them piano or flute or poetry, or whatever else it is that a society considers markers of an acceptable king or queen. If it's yourself, then you'll also have to distract yourself from other things to acquire these things and sort of advertise them. So it made sense in the last 10,000 years for people who had the unusual shot at being king or queen to cut back on their fertility. But that wouldn't have been most people. That would have been a small fraction of the population. The question is, why is everybody doing this? So the story would be, this made sense if you are a rare elite. But how would you tell if you're a rare elite? Well, one plausible indicator would have been relative wealth. Am I richer than the other people around me? If I'm richer, then maybe, I should start to learn poetry or teach my kids poetry or whatever else it is so that they can try to be king or queen. But until the last few hundred years, average wealth almost never varied. Pretty much all societies always had a pretty low median wealth. So evolution got sloppy. And instead of encoding in us the heuristic, if my relative wealth is high, cut back on fertility and go for being king or queen, instead it went with the heuristic, if my wealth is high, go for being king or queen. Because, relative wealth is, say, the ratio between my wealth and the average wealth. But it's a little more complicated to do the ratio than just the number. And if the denominator of the ratio never changed, there wasn't any point in looking at that number. Just look at the top, right? So the story is, that's what we've been doing. We evolved this habit to just look at our absolute wealth and decide that if we are absolutely wealthy, we would have a shot at being king or queen, and therefore we should cut back on our fertility to invest in cultural markers that would make us a good candidate. And we've all been doing that. We've all been investing in cultural markers. We've been getting educated and learning sports and poetry and hobbies and impressive hobbies of all sorts. And the whole world is doing that. And they're all cutting back on fertility to make room for that. And it would have made sense for a small fraction of elites in ancient worlds to do that who are unusually rich. But since we're all rich, it doesn't make sense because you're not going to be king or queen by doing that around here. But that's your evolved habit. So, the story is this thing you're doing by having fewer kids, what you're really trying to do is be king or queen by being this especially impressive cultural specimen who's read a lot of books and knows how to knit, whittle, or whatever is in your world, the prestigious things, going to grad school, getting a Ph.D., writing a screenplay, whatever it is in your world, that's what you're all energized by. And the reason is evolution thought, that would make you a good candidate for king or queen. But wake up, you're not going to be king or queen. We don't have those. And this isn't going to play out that way. Your best shot at having more kids is just have more kids.
Yeah, I can see that. I am definitely trying to be king of my own world. And also, I see just a number of other things, like regarding what we talked about. There are messages around us about having less kids in order to be a good human, basically. Almost every world leader talks about overpopulation all the time and how to depopulate, not in the conspiracy way, but just, there's, I don't know, just in ways that we can stop our carbon tracks or whatever, and which is just funny to me because then everyone's getting their 12th iPhone of their life, but not having kids, or they're buying like their 100th piece of clothing off of Amazon straight from China, but thinking like, if they don't drink from this straw this one time, they're doing their part. So I feel like there's probably like 8 different factors contributing to that. And not to mention, because of the health of our world, the microplastics, the crap in the US food system, because we have the worst food laws in any developed nation, that, a lot of people just can't even have kids right now. I know more people that were
most
struggling
of it is
with
a choice,
fertility.
right? I mean, surely people vary in who can have how many kids, but mostly it's a choice. That is, people hundreds of years ago were vastly poorer than us, and they managed to have them because they really wanted them. So the weird thing is they would look at us and just be puzzled by our disinterest in the kids. Why don't you care? Why does it seem so interesting? And that's what we should ask ourselves. Why are we so disinterested?
It is a good point to bring up. If we do choose to have these kids, we should learn these social norms so that we're not outcast from society. So thank you so much for bringing all of this wisdom. I could have talked about this book for another 2 hours. There's just so much.
Well, I'm available if you want to go do it again, round 2.
Great. I will keep you on my list because I have another 50 questions we could have touched on. So for listeners that are interested in learning more, because there's so much more that we could have dived into, where's the best place for them to connect and find your book?
Well, the book is just The Elephant in the Brain, Hidden Motives in Everyday Life. I'm Robin Hanson. The other author is Kevin Simler. So if you Google, there is a website, elephantinthebrain.com, but if you just Google the name, I'm sure you can find the book. I'm found at hanson.gmu.edu. You can find me on Twitter at Robin Hanson, relatively easy to find. But, the main question you should pause and ask yourself is, do you really want to know your hidden motives before you read the book? Because that's what I've got to tell you. It won't necessarily be pretty.
All the links for this episode will be at mindlove.com/272. Your challenge for this week is to bring awareness to some of the signals that you're signaling. What are you wearing and why? How do you present yourself and why? Yeah, maybe it just makes you feel good, but sometimes it's worth it to take a deeper look and ask yourself, why is this important to me? Because often we create a behavior, we make it a pattern, and then we don't go back and question it. One of my favorite stories from the last month was about the girl whose favorite color was green. And she was finally asked why her favorite color was green when she was in her late 30s. And she realized that the first time she ever said that was when a crush of hers in elementary school said his favorite color was green. So hers was too. And then she just never questioned it after that. We do that all the time. We maybe like to wear certain things or speak in a certain way, or we present ourselves a certain way on social media, and just ask yourself, why? Is this for me or is it for someone else? It doesn't really matter what the answer is, but the more awareness that we can bring to our own actions and thoughts and feelings, the more intentionally we're actually able to live. So often we create these patterns based on what we think other people want, or because we think it's going to improve our status somehow, when we could be creating our lives from the inside out, deciding what feels best to us as individuals, how we want to be in the world, regardless of how it appears to others, and then start consciously creating patterns around that. So let me know how it goes. Reach out to me on Instagram at MindLoveMelissa. If you'd like to support Mind Love, the best way to do that is by joining Mind Love Premium at mindlove.com/premium. You get over 50 exclusive episodes that are only available for premium members and soon to be 100. Plus you get early release and an ad-free listening experience, plus meditations and other bonuses. You can also support one of my sponsors at mindlove.com/sponsors, or you can leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And that's all for today. So thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning into Your Higher Frequency with Mind Love. Head to mindlove.com for a free gift to keep your vibes up until next week.